Let me take care of the troublemakers. I'm going to remarry. My eldest son, who left behind 8-year-old twins, Mary and Lisa, suddenly passed away, and his wife started yelling nasty things at me. As I was about to yell back at my rude daughter-in-law, her mother chimed in, laughing and saying more spiteful things. We're returning defective musical instruments to the head of the defective family. Sooner or later, my daughter will give birth to a child, so we don't need your defective grandchildren. They talked ill of my grandchildren as if they were scraping my nerves with a fish, and my anger turned into disgust. I just didn't want to be around them anymore. I decided to take my grandchildren and leave my daughter-in-law's house. As we walked out the front door, for some reason my grandchildren started to laugh, looking just alike. Just as I wondered what was going on with them, I heard my daughter-in-law and her mother's screams coming from inside the house. My name is Sally. I am 68 years old, and I live with my son, Jason. My husband passed away about 5 years ago, and Jason, who had been living away from home, moved in with me, worried about me being alone. I have another child, my eldest son, Henry, who is already married and lives with his family a little way from my home. Jason was already over 30, so I wanted him to get married soon, but he didn't seem interested. Henry was also worried about this and sometimes visited us to talk to Jason. Jason, should I introduce you to someone nice? You should get married soon and put Mom's mind at ease. I was happy to hear that. Henry had the same thoughts as me. Jason knew we were concerned about him and jokingly said, "Never mind me. More importantly, are things going well with you and your wife, brother?" Henry looked troubled when Jason pointed this out. I had been worried about it for a while too. It seemed like Henry and his wife weren't getting along very well. Henry married his wife Molly about 10 years ago, and they have twins who will be 8 this year. I was surprised when I heard Molly was pregnant with twins. My husband, who was still healthy at the time, was overjoyed, saying we'd have 2 grandchildren at once. On the other hand, I was worried if Molly could handle raising the children properly. Molly, a stay-at-home mom, often went back to her parents' house without doing any housework since they got married. She said she was worried about her mother, who lived alone and often went back to her place. Isn't she spoiling Molly too much? You need to be firm or she'll walk all over you. I told Henry sternly after hearing about Molly's behavior. Even so, Henry couldn't tell Molly not to go back to her parents' house so often, and he ended up doing the housework himself. It might have been okay when it was just the 2 of them, but I wanted Molly to do the housework properly, especially with children on the way. Raising 1 child is hard enough, but twins would be even more challenging. My husband tried to reassure me, saying Molly will change once the children are born. But even after the twins were born, Molly didn't seem to have any sense of responsibility as a mother and pushed the childcare onto Henry. Fathers are supposed to take care of the children in this day and age. I'm tired from childbirth, so I'm going to rest at my parents' house. That's what Molly said before leaving the twins and going back to her parents' house. Even my husband, who had been saying Molly would shape up once the children were born, was furious. I couldn't forgive Molly's attitude, but Henry was at a loss, so I felt I had to help take care of the twins. As a stay-at-home mom, I started staying over at Henry's house to take care of the twins. My husband, who was still working at the time, would come by after work to help, which was a great help. Jason would also come by on his days off to play with the twins. Thanks to everyone's help, the twins grew up healthy and happy, and we were all relieved. About 3 months after the twins were born, Molly came to Henry's house with her mother, Terry. Don't hog our children all to yourselves. There are also my mother's precious grandchildren, you know. Molly glared at us with a scary look on her face, but all I could think was, what are you doing here now? Of course, the twins were also Terry's grandchildren, but I was annoyed that she hadn't shown her face even once until now. They are my precious grandchildren, so raise them properly. But I'm worried if you can actually do it. Terry looked down on us as she spoke and then held the twins, alternating with Molly. The twins started crying loudly, and Molly and Terry looked troubled. Why are they crying when I, their mother, am holding them? Don't they recognize me? The twins cried even louder when Molly yelled. I wonder why too. My husband and I each took a twin, and they immediately stopped crying. Seeing this, Terry became red with anger. You must have taught them only to cry when we hold them. You're so mean. It's impossible to teach a 3-month-old baby something like that. And without another word, Terry went home. Molly also glared at us with a sudden expression. They've turned into strange children because of the way you raised them. With that, Molly left the house as well. And they were probably shocked that the twins cried when they held them because they didn't come to Henry's house for a while after that. I was angry at Molly for neglecting her childcare duties, but I also found it ridiculous that Terry was angry about the babies crying. Normally, Terry should have been teaching Molly how to raise children, so I found it pathetic that she got angry over something like that. I was busy helping Henry with the twins, but I found those days fulfilling. My husband came by almost every day to check on us and happily played with the twins. I was so busy that I didn't think much of it, but when Jason came to visit Henry's house, he said with a worried look, "Is Mom going to keep taking care of the twins like this forever? Has Brother talked to his wife about it?" I was startled when I heard Jason's words. Henry and Molly were a married couple, but they were living apart as if they were separated. Henry was still paying Molly's living expenses, even though she had moved back to her parents' house after giving birth. But their situation was far from normal. I was happy to be able to take care of the twins, but I knew it wasn't good to continue this way forever. "You should talk to him and think about the future." That's what I said, and I decided to talk to Henry about it. When my husband and I asked him about his relationship with Molly, he seemed troubled. I've been trying to talk to Molly, but she keeps making excuses, saying she's busy. I don't know what she's so busy with when she's not even working. Seeing Henry so frustrated, I thought it might be better for him to divorce Molly. My husband seemed to agree and suggested to Henry that he should divorce Molly. Henry had apparently already brought up the subject of divorce with Molly before we mentioned it. She insists she won't get a divorce, and her mother is also against it, which makes it even more complicated. Molly apparently wouldn't give a clear reason why she wouldn't divorce him, but Terry seemed to be concerned about what people would think. It would be embarrassing if the neighbors found out my daughter got divorced. I wouldn't be able to show my face in public. That's what she yelled, and she seemed determined not to let them divorce. The neighbors probably already thought it was strange that Molly had been living at her parents' house ever since she gave birth. And since she had a baby but they never saw it, they were probably wondering what was going on. Given Terry's concern about appearances, I wondered how she was explaining the baby situation to the neighbors. Ultimately, the decision to divorce was up to Henry and Molly, so my husband and I decided to leave it to them. We were worried about Terry interfering, but in the end, it was up to the two of them to decide. As we were thinking about all this, the twins continued to grow, and they turned 3. Molly was still living at her parents' house, but she seemed to miss the twins, so she started coming back to Henry's house on weekends. "Is your mother still here? This is our house, so please don't just barge in." Molly was unhappy with me for taking care of the twins. She ordered me to leave, even though I was taking care of the twins in her place since she wouldn't come back from her parents' house. My husband was furious at Molly's attitude, but we didn't want to argue in front of the children, so we went back to our house. "Don't get so angry or your blood pressure will go up again. The doctor warned you about that, remember?" Even though I said that, my husband was still grumbling, unable to let go of his anger. Around this time, my husband was going to the hospital because he wasn't feeling well, and the doctor diagnosed him with high blood pressure. His blood pressure had been high for a while, but it had gotten worse the year before he retired. He was taking medication and exercising, but his blood pressure wouldn't go down, which worried me. As these days continued, my husband, who had said he wanted to live long enough to see our twin grandchildren grow up and become adults, suddenly collapsed. It happened while I was at Henry's house taking care of the twins. My husband's condition seemed to have worsened while he was at home alone. When I got home, I noticed something was wrong and looked for my husband, only to find him collapsed in front of the TV. I immediately called an ambulance and he was rushed to the hospital, but he passed away the next day. I was so shocked by the suddenness of it all that I couldn't think straight. My 2 sons took care of the funeral arrangements for me. I was so depressed, but my 2 grandchildren stayed by my side, which made me very happy. "Thank you for worrying about me." When I said that, they silently held my hand. My husband was also very important to the twins, so they must have been in shock, not understanding why he was suddenly gone. Just as I was starting to recover from the shock thanks to my grandchildren, Molly appeared with a big grin on her face. "How much inheritance did your father leave?" "Henry is the eldest son, so he should get a lot, right?" The funeral wasn't even over yet, and Molly was already talking about the inheritance. I glared at her. Jason was also disgusted by Molly's attitude, and he looked very displeased. But Henry answered Molly calmly. "Molly, you came to help too. We'll talk about the inheritance later." Molly looked upset when she heard Henry's words. "You're just saying that to exclude me. I won't let you do whatever you want." I snapped back. "Don't you worry more about the kids than the inheritance?" Let me take care of them for you." When I said that, Molly glanced at me and replied coldly, "Taking care of the kids is your job, Mom. More importantly, how much did your husband have?" I was furious that Molly was ignoring the twins. I told her that my husband only had a little bit of cash. Molly believed me and looked disappointed as she walked away. I was again angry at Molly's attitude and glared at her back. But the twins looked at me with tears in their eyes. "I'm sorry for making such a scary face. We should send Grandpa off to heaven with smiles or he'll be sad." When I smiled and said that, the twins smiled back. I realized that my young grandchildren were more mature than Molly. Thanks to my son's thorough preparations, my husband's funeral went smoothly. Neither Molly nor Terry showed up at the funeral, which actually made me happy. After the funeral, when things had calmed down a bit, I suddenly felt a wave of loneliness. I had lived with my husband in that house for so long, and now I didn't know what to do with myself. I had spent so much time at Henry's house taking care of the twins, but my husband's presence was still a big part of my life. I was thinking about moving in with Henry since it was lonely being alone in the house when Jason came to me. "Can I move back in here? I kind of missed living here." That's what Jason said, but he was probably worried about me. Even if I moved in with Henry, Molly would come back on weekends and probably treat me like a nuisance. That meant I needed to keep my house, but I would have to live there alone. I was touched by Jason's kindness and agreed to live with him. Even after my husband passed away and Jason moved in with me, I continued to take care of the twins. But after they started kindergarten, they spent more time at my house. I would pick them up from kindergarten and they would wait at my house for Henry to come home from work. This was actually easier for me. They didn't come to my house on weekends when Molly was around, but on Mondays they would tell me what it was like at their house. Apparently, Molly still didn't do any housework, and Henry had to make all the meals. The twins told me that Molly didn't play with them either and just ate snacks while looking at her smartphone. I didn't understand why Molly even bothered to come back to Henry's house on weekends. After the twins went back to their house, I talked to Jason about Molly. I think she just wants to maintain the fact that she's married to your brother. That way she can keep getting living expenses from him. When I heard Jason's explanation, I thought, how greedy can she be? When my husband passed away, she was only concerned about the inheritance. It made me wonder if she only cared about money. I even started to suspect that she married Henry because he worked for a large corporation. Even though their mother was like this, the twins grew up to be kind and well-adjusted, and they started elementary school. I wished my husband could have seen them wearing their new backpacks, but I'm sure he was watching over them from heaven. Even after the twins started elementary school, Molly continued to come back only on weekends. Now that they were in elementary school, the twins became more outspoken and started to talk like adults. Sometimes, Terry would come with Molly to visit the twins' house, but even then, Henry had to cook. I couldn't believe a mother-in-law would make her son-in-law cook, but Terry would even criticize Henry's cooking. "Your cooking is as bad as ever. I wonder what kind of terrible food your mother fed you." The older twin would immediately retort, "Dad's cooking is delicious, and Grandma's cooking is even better." The younger twin would also chime in, "It's not nice to complain if you don't cook it yourself. If you don't like it, you should make it yourself." Terry apparently got furious at the twins for honestly answering back like that. When I heard about it later from the twins, I couldn't help but burst out laughing. Terry even yelled at the young twins, "Don't talk back to adults, you brats. You're not my grandchildren." Molly laughed and calmed Terry down. "Oh, don't get so worked up over what children say. They were raised by a rude mother, so of course they won't be polite." When I heard from the twins that Molly thought I was rude, I was surprised. I thought Molly was the rude one, but I guess she couldn't see it herself. The twins seemed used to Molly only coming back on weekends, but I was worried if this was really okay. The twins had started to realize that their family was different from their friends' families after hearing about their family situations at school. I felt sorry for the twins, who didn't know what it was like to have a family that lived together, and I worried about what I could do. Before talking to Henry directly, I decided to ask for Jason's opinion. "I've always wondered why your brother hasn't gotten a divorce. If things continue like this, he's the only one who will suffer." It seemed Jason also wanted Henry to get a divorce, just like me. Because Molly and Henry lived separately, their living expenses were doubled. More than that, I thought it wasn't good for the twins' upbringing. Henry and Molly's relationship was far from good, and I was sure the twins were unhappy about it. Knowing that, Jason felt the same way. I decided to talk to Henry, who came to pick up the twins. "I have something important to talk to you about. Can we talk for a bit?" Because I looked so serious, Henry seemed to understand that I was going to talk about something important. "If it's about Molly, I have something to tell you too. Things will be settled soon, so please wait a little longer." I didn't know what he meant by settled, but I was relieved that he was thinking things through on his own. When I told Jason what Henry had said, he looked troubled. Maybe my brother is already talking to her about a divorce. They might be arguing about custody of the twins. When I heard Jason's words, I thought that Molly wouldn't want to raise the twins by herself now. Knowing how much Molly cared about money, I suspected that she was claiming that Henry was the cause of the divorce and demanding alimony. I could understand if Henry demanded alimony from Molly, who neglected childcare and often went back to her parents' house. I imagined that Molly, who was short on money, might be begging Henry to reduce the alimony, and that's why they were arguing. But divorce was a matter between Henry and Molly, so I decided to wait and see. However, after that, Henry didn't bring up the subject of divorce again, and both Jason and I were worried about him. Then I received a call from Henry's company saying that he had collapsed at work and had been rushed to the hospital. The twins were already back at my house, so I took them with me to the hospital. The doctor explained that Henry had suffered a stroke and was in critical condition. Jason arrived a little later and tried to cheer me up, as I was in shock. "It'll be okay. Medicine is advanced these days, so I'm sure my brother will be fine." Jason said that, but he seemed shaken too. The twins could tell from my and Jason's reactions that Henry was in a dangerous state, and they clung to me, looking like they were about to cry. Seeing them holding on to me so tightly with their small hands, I knew I had to be strong. Molly, the twins' mother, didn't show up at the hospital even after we contacted her. I made up my mind that I would protect the twins no matter what. The next day and every day after that, I took the twins to the hospital to see Henry, but he remained unconscious and in critical condition. Jason would come by after work to help, and he bowed his head to the nurses in charge. The nurses were also very worried about Henry, knowing that he had young children. However, about a week later, Henry passed away. I never expected Henry to pass away before me. I was at a loss as to what to do. Jason handled all the funeral arrangements, so I was able to stay with the twins. To be honest, it felt more like the twins were helping me than the other way around. I was so shocked by Henry's sudden death that I felt like I could just collapse, but seeing the twins made me realize I had to keep going. As for their mother, Molly, she never came to visit him in the hospital, didn't help with the funeral arrangements. She didn't even call to check on the twins. It was as if she had completely abandoned them, which made me sad. But when the funeral started, Molly and Terry showed up with big smiles on their faces. I never thought he would pass away so soon, but the timing was perfect for me. Instead of mourning her husband, Molly was smiling and happy. The other people at the funeral were also disgusted by her words. By perfect timing, she probably meant that she was happy to get the inheritance sooner. Henry worked for a large corporation, so he must have a lot of assets. His wife, Molly, will get half, so share some with me too. Terry was also talking loudly, not caring about the atmosphere around her. Jason tried to calm them down, his anger barely contained. "Let's talk about the inheritance later. Please keep your voices down or you'll disturb everyone." Molly, after being warned by Jason, spoke triumphantly. "As Henry's brother, you have nothing to do with the inheritance. The only heirs are me and our 2 children. It's true that neither Jason nor I were heirs, but I didn't want to hear that from Molly, who hadn't even come to see Henry when he was in the hospital. Don't come here now and act all high and mighty. I called you many times, but why didn't you come to the hospital?" I asked Molly, glaring at her. She looked down on me and answered, "There's no point in me going to the hospital. It wouldn't have cured him. Besides, he was unconscious, so I couldn't even talk to him. I thought it would be a waste of time." When I heard Molly's words, I was furious and about to yell back, but the twins stopped me. "There's no point in talking to this person." The older twin said that, and the younger twin added in a small voice, "Yeah, just let her say whatever she wants." I was surprised that the twins were more composed than I was. They were right. Getting angry was probably what Molly and Terry wanted. I didn't want to play into their hands, so I clenched my teeth and tried to suppress my anger. Molly and Terry seemed to have heard what the twins said, and they started complaining to them instead. "You called me your own mother, this person. You've become so rude because you were raised by a bad person." When Molly said that, Terry added, looking disgusted, "These ill-mannered, defective children are not my grandchildren. No matter how good a child is, if they are raised by someone bad, they'll turn out defective too." I couldn't stand it anymore when they called the twins defective. "Don't say such things in front of the children. They're very good children." I yelled and glared at Molly and Terry. The people at the funeral also gave them cold looks. Even Molly and Terry seemed to realize that everyone around them was against them, and they quickly left. Even after they were gone, my anger didn't subside, and I stood there trembling. It's not good for you to get so angry. People like that will surely get their punishment, so don't worry." Even after hearing Jason's words, I couldn't calm down. But the twins were looking at me with worried expressions, so I finally managed to get a hold of myself. The twins were the ones who were hurt the most by Molly and Terry's cruel words. They were worried about me, so I couldn't stay angry forever. I took a deep breath and tried to calm down further. Thanks to Molly and Terry leaving, the funeral went smoothly and we were able to properly say goodbye to Henry. After the funeral, when things had settled down, I started to worry about the future. I was worried about the house Henry and the twins had been living in and about my relationship with Molly. I would continue to take care of the twins, so that wasn't a problem, but I couldn't imagine how Molly would react. Molly seemed to only care about Henry's inheritance and would probably push the twins onto me. Terry, who called the twins defective, wouldn't take care of them either. That much was clear. Jason seemed to understand my concerns and contacted Molly for me. He probably did it because Molly and I had argued at the funeral and he didn't want us to clash again. She said to leave everything to her. She was happy when I called because she doesn't want to deal with anything troublesome. I thought so. "Did you talk about the inheritance?" I asked. She ordered me to come to their house soon to explain the inheritance. She wants the inheritance but doesn't want to do anything herself, it seems. When I heard Jason's explanation, I got angry again. If she wanted Henry's inheritance so badly, she should have done the paperwork herself. But she pushed it onto Jason even though she had said he had no right to the inheritance. I felt sorry for Jason, who had to do all the work. He even went to the hospital to thank the nurses who had taken care of Henry during his short stay. I left the inheritance matters to Jason because I didn't know much about it. He had researched it a lot when my husband passed away, so he said he understood it well. Jason explained that Molly, as a spouse, would inherit half of Henry's assets, which I found unfair. Molly didn't take care of Henry or the children, so why should she get half of his assets? It doesn't sit well with me. When I complained, Jason smiled wryly. He told me that it was the law, so there was nothing we could do about it. We decided to accept it. Jason and I moved Henry's belongings from his house to my house. We got rid of unnecessary things, so there wasn't much beside the twins' belongings. After we finished moving, the twins handed me and Jason an envelope. Dad said it was important. The older twin explained. It seemed Henry had given it to them a little before he collapsed, and the twins had kept it safe. He apparently told them to keep it safe because he was afraid Molly might find it if he kept it in his room. The twins told me that Molly would rummage through Henry's room on weekends looking for valuables. That's probably why Henry kept his bank books and other important documents at my house. When he didn't have time to bring them to my house, he would hide them in the children's room. I wondered what was in the envelope the twins gave me and opened it. I was so surprised by what I saw that I immediately handed it to Jason. The twins didn't seem to know what was inside, but I felt they shouldn't see it. Let's take this with us when we talk about the inheritance. My brother would be sad if we didn't. Jason, who is usually calm, was shaken with anger. Next, we prepared for the inheritance discussion, so we went to Molly's house. We thought there might be some trouble, so we considered leaving the twins with my friend, but they insisted on coming with us. When we arrived, Molly and Terry greeted us with happy expressions. "You kept us waiting. We were about to call you because you were so late." Molly said that, and Terry laughed. "You must have been busy preparing because there were a lot of assets. But the heirs are just Molly and those brats, so it should have been fine, right?" Terry called the twins brats again, and I was about to get angry when the twins calmly told me to let it go. Seeing me getting upset, Molly said something spiteful. "Isn't it embarrassing to be told off by your grandchildren? You may be upset that you won't get Henry's assets, but it can't be helped, so give it up." Terry and Molly's words made me so angry that I felt like I was going to explode. But Jason had explained Henry's assets to me beforehand, and I had the documents from the twins, so I managed to calm myself down. Even before the discussion started, Molly and Terry looked excited. We asked the twins to watch TV in the next room and be quiet. Jason started talking to Molly and Terry, who were eager to find out how much Henry's inheritance was. "Before we talk about the inheritance, there's something I need to confirm with you. You were having an affair, and my brother was going to sue you for it, right?" Molly, who had been in high spirits until then, turned pale when she heard Jason's words. The documents the twins had received from Henry were the results of an investigation into Molly's affair. Henry had found out about Molly's infidelity and was planning to demand compensation. "That's all in the past. Henry is gone, so there is no need to pay anything." Terry spoke triumphantly for Molly, who was too shaken to respond. Terry's interjection seemed to have given Molly some courage back. That's right. Henry is no longer here, so the affair doesn't matter anymore. It was infuriating to see Molly looking so smug despite her infidelity. It seemed that when Henry passed away, Molly thought the timing was perfect because she was being sued for the affair. Molly must have been at a loss for what to do after her affair was discovered, and she was asked to pay compensation, but then Henry unexpectedly passed away. It was good timing for Molly, but from Henry's perspective, it must have been frustrating. Thinking about how Henry must have felt, both Jason and I wanted to get even with her. Hearing Molly's response, Jason let out a forced sigh. I'm sure your brother is regretting it in the afterlife, but it can't be helped. Molly, not caring about that at all, pressed Jason impatiently to tell her about Henry's assets. Jason presented the documents and explained how much Henry's assets were. Molly, who had been staring at the documents, suddenly shouted, "That's all he had? And there's even debt!" Terry also became angry when she learned that there weren't as many assets as she had expected. Are you trying to deceive us? You're hiding the assets somewhere, aren't you? Jason told them that it was correct, and I added, Henry had to pay for your living expenses every month in addition to his own family's. If you had lived together, there might have been more assets. I said it sarcastically, which seemed to anger them even more. Realizing that there were almost no assets, Terry brought up the life insurance. Molly will get the insurance money, right? The beneficiary should be his wife, Molly. Terry said that confidently, but I was the beneficiary of the insurance. When Molly found out, she claimed that I had tricked Henry into changing the beneficiary. If you're not satisfied with the beneficiary, please contact the insurance company. We didn't even know my mother was the beneficiary until my brother passed away. Molly was also dissatisfied with the insurance. Why is your mother the beneficiary when he has children? Usually it's the spouse or children. We wouldn't know the real reason unless we asked Henry, but he probably thought that if the twins were the beneficiaries, Molly would take the money. Henry probably didn't think he would pass away so soon, so he made me the beneficiary for the time being since I was taking care of the twins. He probably planned to change it if something happened to me. Because of Molly's affair, Henry was considering a divorce. Even if they separated, Molly would still be the twins' mother, and he probably thought she would take the insurance money if it went to them. Molly and Terry were trembling with frustration, realizing that there were almost no assets and they wouldn't get the insurance money. If I had known it would turn out like this, I should have divorced him sooner. I would have had to pay alimony, though. Apparently, Henry had brought up the subject of divorce about a month before he passed away. Molly wasn't against getting a divorce, but she didn't want to lose the living expenses and pay alimony, so she postponed making a decision. You should be glad you didn't have to pay alimony. Anyway, you're going to marry a rich guy, right? When Terry said that, I realized that Molly was already planning to remarry her lover. The investigation report on Molly's affair, which Henry had obtained, also included information about her lover. Was he really rich, though? I muttered unintentionally. Terry seemed to have heard me and retorted proudly. Molly's new husband is the heir of the Johnson family. He's completely different from your son, who left behind nothing but debt. When I heard Terry's words and looked at Jason, he nodded meaningfully. I pretended to be surprised. Compared to the Johnsons, Henry was nothing. He could only leave behind debt. When I said that, Terry seemed to feel better. Molly should renounce the inheritance. If you add up the remaining assets and debts, there's nothing to inherit. Molly seemed to have taken her mother's advice. You're right, Mom. It's not worth the trouble if I only get a little money. What if there's more debt that I have to pay back if I inherit? Both Jason and I were trying hard not to laugh as Terry and Molly were talking about renouncing the inheritance on their own. We had planned to have Molly renounce the inheritance from the beginning, but we were worried that she wouldn't agree. But at this rate, it seemed like it would be fine. Okay then, I'll contact you later about the procedure. Jason said that calmly, but I was worried that Molly might change her mind. After the discussion, Molly, who was disappointed that she couldn't inherit anything, said something spiteful to me and Jason with a smirk. You should take care of those kids forever. You got the insurance money, so it's only natural, right? I was about to snap at her, but then she said even more gleefully, I'm leaving those troublemakers to you. I'm going to marry Mr. Johnson, the heir to the Johnson family. I was about to yell at her for calling the twins troublemakers, but then Terry chimed in with a laugh. We're returning defective goods to the head of the defective family. Sooner or later, Molly will give birth to Mr. Johnson's child, so we don't need your defective grandchildren. They talked ill of my grandchildren as if they were scraping my nerves. My anger had turned into disgust. I didn't want to be around them anymore. I decided to leave Molly's house with Jason and the twins. As we walked out the front door, for some reason my grandchildren started to laugh, looking just alike. Just as I wondered what was going on with them, I heard Molly and Terry's screams coming from inside the house. Hearing their screams, the twins burst into laughter. "There's a huge snake in the house! Somebody help!" Terry screamed and came running to the front door. She seemed so scared that she had lost her balance and was crawling on all fours. She crawled past us, who were standing at the entrance, and ran outside. I didn't know what was going on, but the twins seemed to know something. "What did you do?" "They were screaming about a snake. Did you play a prank?" I asked. The older twin answered with a grin. "This ear is the ear of the snake, so I put a big toy snake in there. I wonder if they thought it was real," she said with a smile. The twins said they would take the toy back and went back inside the house. I followed them and found Molly passed out in the living room. It seemed she had fainted after mistaking the toy snake for a real one. I was worried and called out to her, and she soon regained consciousness, which was a relief. But then the twins held the toy snake in front of Molly's face. "Ah!" Molly screamed and fainted again. Normally I should have scolded the twins for playing a prank, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Considering how their own mother called them troublemakers and their grandmother called them defective, I felt like praising them instead. When I called out to Molly again, she regained consciousness, but she seemed terrified of the snake and ran to her room. I thought it was finally time to go home, so I went to the front door. Terry, who had crawled out earlier, were standing there, trembling and looking at us. She seemed to have managed to stand up, but she was out of breath and leaning against the door for support. "What about the snake? Wasn't it in the house?" Jason and I ignored Terry and walked out the front door, but the twins threw the toy snake at Terry. "I hate snakes!" Terry screamed and seemed to lose her balance again. She crawled outside on all fours. I didn't know that both mother and daughter were afraid of snakes, but I felt a sense of satisfaction. It seemed the twins had come along with us to get back at Terry and Molly. "Is this snake really that scary? This is a good product, not a defective one." The younger twins said that, and I hugged them tightly. "You're not troublemakers or defective. You're my precious grandchildren." The twins seemed to understand and smiled happily. The day after the inheritance discussion, Jason and I went to complete the necessary paperwork. I was relieved that we wouldn't have to deal with Molly and Terry anymore. But then they came rushing to my house. "Why do I have to pay alimony to the children? A lawyer sent me a bill." Molly yelled angrily. I answered her calmly. "Didn't you know that the right to claim alimony can be inherited? You renounced the inheritance, so the only heirs are the twins." Molly finally seemed to understand and looked dumbfounded. Terry, who had come with her, started yelling that we had deceived them. "It was written in the documents we gave you during the discussion that alimony can also be inherited. Didn't you read them?" Molly and Terry seemed to remember the documents, but hadn't checked the contents, and they turned pale. Realizing their mistake, Molly asked me in a frightened voice, "He also claimed alimony from my lover, right? He got angry and said he won't marry me. What are you going to do about it?" Molly was trying to blame us for her not being able to get married. Jason said to her, trying not to laugh, "Mr. Johnson, the heir of the Johnson family, should be able to pay the alimony easily, right? Were you really rich?" Jason asked meaningfully. Molly seemed flustered, and her eyes darted around. According to the investigation report Henry had obtained, Molly's lover wasn't the heir of the Johnson family, but just an unemployed man. He probably pretended to be the heir of the Johnson family to attract women. He apparently had other girlfriends besides Molly. "It seems like you were deceived. There's no way the heir of the Johnson family would date someone like you who doesn't do housework or childcare. A defective product." "Don't be rude. Molly is a wonderful daughter." Both Jason and I were dumbfounded by Terry's words. I wondered if Molly, who didn't do housework or childcare and even had an affair, could be considered a wonderful daughter. Terry suddenly seemed embarrassed when she saw us looking at her in disbelief. Now that Terry had calmed down, I spoke to Molly again. "The alimony is what Henry left for the twins, so please pay it properly. I don't care who you marry, but please take responsibility." But Molly didn't seem to care about the twins. "You got the insurance money, so you don't need the alimony, right? Use that money to raise the children." Molly even brought up the insurance money I received, and her mind seemed to be in a state of confusion. She was probably panicking because her lover had said he would marry her, and she was being asked to pay the alimony again, which she thought she wouldn't have to pay. Her lover, whom she thought was the heir of the Johnson family, turned out to be an unemployed man, and Molly had only been seen as a source of money. Any rich man wouldn't let a woman pay for everything, but Molly had been completely fooled. Seeing Molly so upset, I thought that maybe Henry's anger in the afterlife had subsided. When I told Molly and Terry to leave, they kept insisting that they wouldn't pay the alimony. Eventually, Molly said something strange. "I'll raise the twins. That way I can manage the alimony they receive." Molly seemed to think that she could manage the alimony herself if she raised the twins. That way, she thought the alimony from her lover would also be hers. So you've given up on marrying Mr. Johnson, the heir of the Johnson family? You were right. He wasn't the heir after all, was he? I asked her with a laugh. Molly seemed to have given up on the remarriage. More than the remarriage, it seemed like she was more concerned about how she would make a living from now on. While we were talking, the twins came to us. We're going to live here with Grandma. You are not our mom, the older twin yelled. We can't live with someone who calls us troublemakers and defective. The younger twin added clearly. Molly, rejected by the twins, suddenly spoke to them in a sweet, coaxing voice. Don't say such mean things. Come live with Mommy. I'll buy you toys, games, anything you want. The twins looked at each other and grinned when they heard Molly's words. Then they took out the toy snake they had used at Molly's house the other day. We have toys, so we don't need any, the older twin yelled, and the twins threw the toy snake at Terry and Molly. Ah! Molly and Terry screamed and ran away. They still seemed to think it was a real snake and ran off in a great hurry. The twins burst into laughter when they saw them. Jason and I couldn't help but laugh along with them. After that, Molly and Terry never showed their faces at my house again. We agreed that Molly would pay the alimony in installments. I don't know where her lover got the money, but he paid the alimony in one lump sum. He probably wanted to pay off the alimony quickly and cut ties with Molly. Molly, who had once given up on marrying her lover, seemed to have proposed to him again. After I demanded that she pay the alimony, she probably thought that she should remarry him even if he wasn't the heir of the Johnson family, so that he would pay her alimony. But her lover seemed to understand what she was doing. He was probably trying to cut ties with Molly quickly and find a woman who would give him more money. Molly realized that she had been completely abandoned when her lover stopped answering her calls and messages. Molly found a part-time job to pay the alimony, but she couldn't work properly because she had been slacking off for so long. She would complain about any instructions she received and often skipped work. The company was at a loss as to what to do with Molly, so they didn't give her many shifts, and she ended up not making much money. Angry, Molly quit her part-time job. Without a job, Molly and Terry struggled to make ends meet. Until now, Henry had been supporting them financially, but now Molly had to pay for her own living expenses. On top of that, she had taken out loans when she was still seeing her lover, so she was struggling to pay them back. Terry also took out loans, thinking that Molly would marry the heir of the Johnson family, and bought many things. Apparently, she had been in debt even before that, which is why she was so fixated on Henry's inheritance. Terry also started working part-time to pay off her debts, but she hurt her back because she wasn't used to physical labor. Terry, who had been living a lazy life, had become so frail that she suffered a compression fracture in her spine and became bedridden. Molly had to pay for Terry's hospital bills, so she took out more loans to get by. She also had to find another job, but she had to take care of Terry, so it was difficult for her to find one. She was also borrowing money to cover her daily living expenses, and her debts were so large that it was unclear if she could ever repay them. She was also behind on her loan payments. I was worried if Molly could really pay the alimony, and it seemed like she couldn't. I thought it would have been a disaster if the twins had been left with such a mother. The twins, who started living with me and Jason, went to elementary school every day full of energy. They didn't seem to mind not being able to see their mother since it was the same as before, but they were sad about Henry's passing. But they encouraged each other, and neither Jason nor I ever heard them complain. I wanted to live a long life and take good care of the twins, who were so brave and resilient. Then Jason suddenly announced that he was getting married, which surprised both me and the twins. We were even more surprised when we met his fiancée. Jason's fiancée was the nurse who had taken care of Henry when he was in the hospital. Henry was only in the hospital for a week, but Jason fell in love with the nurse while visiting him every day. After Henry passed away, Jason kept going to the hospital to thank the staff, but it was also to see her. Jason made a strong effort to win her over, and they eventually started dating. Henry had also wanted Jason to get married, so he would have been happy to know that he was the reason they started dating. Jason's fiancée understood the twins' situation well and treated them like her own children. Jason and his fiancée planned to live with me and the twins after they got married. To be honest, I was worried about what would happen to the twins after I was gone, but now I could leave them in Jason's and his wife's care. But I was still healthy, so I wanted to live long enough to see the twins get married.